Okay, can we make sure that the whole group is unmuted?
Okay, yep.
Who has their hand raised?
Yeah, can everyone who's in this group please raise their hand so I can unmute you?
I'm unmuted, I think.
I'm unmuted.
Same.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay. So this is Infodemic Dynamics, and we are conducting a case study of information, misinformation, and disinformation evolution on Twitter. Now, you may not know this, but anti-5G narratives and conspiracy theories have been around since before the pandemic. But more recently, these have gained mainstream attention, and conspiracy theories have now linked 5G and COVID-19, and these have spread across social media with real-world impacts. These have also been amplified by celebrities and public figures, including medical professionals. And we are now seeing these narratives pop up in the real world. Our methods include two complementary approaches for identifying and characterizing narratives. We will use word embeddings and topic modeling, as well as word co-occurrence and community detection. In principle, these approaches should yield similar results. So next we'll go over some of our initial findings.
So we investigate these questions specifically using Twitter data and looking at tweets made between January 1st and April 15th, which contained the string 5G surrounded by a word boundary. Originally, we were going to analyze the frequency of the 5G term in all languages, but we found that the majority of tweets containing this term were in English, so we decided to focus on English language tweets. We do see a notable spike in mentions of 5G, particularly following COVID-19 officially being declared a pandemic. And we see a further spike in April following reports of cell tower arson and harassment of telecom workers. As you might expect, we also do see a heavy tail distribution on user activity, with some users tweeting about 5G over 1,000 times within this window. The most active users include brands, news outlets, and also accounts which are spreading anti-5G misinformation.
Yeah, this is the result of word embeddings. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So word embeddings is a technique that models words as vectors, and you show the you get the different relationships between words. So what we did with all the tweets that were gathered, we did an analysis for February 2020 and April 2020. Well, there was more, but these graphs show obvious relationships. These are TSNE graphs. TSNE is T-stochastic distributed network embedding. It's just a machine learning technique that basically reduces the dimensionality and is effective for visualization. So word embeddings are very high dimensional. They are 300 dimensional vectors per word. So that we cannot visualize. So for visualization, we use TSNE, and you can see that there are clusters of words for Feb 2020 in the tweets and for April 2020. Within the clusters, the emerging words for February 2020 are innovation, services, data, encryption, deceiving. This shows that the narrative was, in February 2020, the narrative was around business side of things, but in April 2020, it shifted more towards corona, conspiracy, risk, psychopaths, and attack. So that's it.
Besides the vector embeddings, we also use network embeddings of the words in the tweets, connecting words that appear in the same tweet into word co-occurrence networks. We use these networks to examine the most central words and how words are being grouped together into topics. We find that the core of the conversation, measured by coreness centrality, changes drastically from February to April, where, as using the last techniques, we saw that the core of the conversation shifted from around business, like the Internet of Things, #IoT, features that would be made more accessible by the 5G networks, to things that are more about the conspiracy theories surrounding 5G. And then using community detection methods on these networks and aggregated month-wise, we can see that the topics are grouped together as into things that we might expect, such as here we can see that a community of the green nodes that are mostly about government topics, and the community of blue nodes is mostly about conspiracy-related topics, and the community of pink nodes is all hashtags. And so we're going to look into this more rigorously soon. As we can see the infodemic spreading into the lexicon over social media from our data, and some destructive and dangerous behavior in the news, spreading at the same time can be aided by less drastic behavior in the population, and we'd like to examine those effects.
Now we turn to the implications of this work for pandemic mitigation. Recent studies from the UK examined the relationship between conspiracy theory beliefs and poor compliance with pandemic mitigation strategies, including social distancing and hand washing. Both of these recent coronavirus-specific studies find strong association between the endorsement of conspiracy beliefs and low compliance with non-pharmaceutical interventions, or NPI. The effect of the 5G conspiracy theories specifically have the strongest implications for non-compliance with public health practices. Next, I will discuss the relationship between conspiracy beliefs, compliance with non-pharmaceutical interventions, and the risk of infection. Given we know that these variables are linked, Swamy and Barron suggest taking action to support active rejection of conspiracy theories. Prior agent-based modeling explores the concept of inoculation against misinformation, and that perhaps inoculating a small percentage of the population, in other words, prohibiting them from believing and spreading misinformation, may be sufficient to mitigate pandemics. Future work needs to explore what inoculation actually looks like in real-world settings and what the ethical implications of such management of misinformation might be. In conclusion, it's important to understand the spread of misinformation during pandemics in order to control the spread of infection. Thank you, and we'll now take questions.
Anyone who has a question, please feel free to ask or post it in the group chat. Okay, if no one has any questions, we're going to move on to our next presentation, a survey of beliefs about the world after COVID-19. And anyone in this group who wants to be unmuted, please raise your hand and I will unmute you.
I see that I'm unmuted. Thank you. I think Phil also needs to be unmuted.
Oh, yeah, I just unmuted myself.
Great.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Sweet. All right, awesome. So we're the Life After group. My name is Phil. My group members are Sam, Jose, and Rory. I think you'll see them in the chat. But there's been a lot of speculation about kind of the future and what it will look like after the pandemic, specifically as related to certain behaviors like hand washing and personal hygiene and wearing masks and things like that. So we were just kind of interested in surveying people about what they think will happen in the future. And so we developed this survey that kind of has two components to each question. there's kind of like a self-oriented version of each question in asking about how they, the individual, will change their own behavior in the future, and then like an other-oriented perspective of what they think about how other people will change. So like, for example, this question about people using handshakes and they themselves using handshakes in the future. And so we have about 60 questions, and yeah, we had a good number of responses as well. And we created this little website to kind of just show some of those results. We had quite a, I guess, diverse range of responses or participants from various countries, Russia, Mexico, South America, and places. And even within the US, we have a lot of people who responded as well. So we were pretty excited about that. And so here's just kind of like a quick overview of the demographics. A fair number of people were at least held a bachelor's degree, so quite educated. Majority of people were still full-time employed at the time of this survey, or students. We actually had more responses from Mexico than the US, which is really cool. And then like a good chunk from Russia. The most popular races were Caucasian and Hispanic/Latino. People were either single and never married, or married. We had more female responses than male responses, although it's like a pretty close distribution. And yeah, this is just like a histogram of our of the ages and incomes. Average age was about 33, kind of leaning more on the younger side, and the income range was super wide. And down here, this is kind of just a interactive widget that if people are interested in, they can request a link to our site and just kind of look at each individual question and kind of compare responses of self versus like other perceptions. So you just click here, you can see here, for example, like the response between I will return to using handshakes or other physical greetings versus how the individual thinks other people will behave in the future. And one is kind of, they think that behavior will happen less in the future, and 5's more. Yeah, now I'll pass it to Sam to kind of go over more of the aggregated responses.
Great, thanks, Phil. Yeah, I'm Sam. I'll take you through a little bit more of the data. So one of the first things we did was we just actually made a plot of all of the data, which is kind of overwhelming to look at, but it's a little bit fun because you can see kind of some general trends. So for example, one of the first things you might notice is that the majority of the responses were positive, so people being in agreement or thinking they're going to do something more. And then some questions that might stand out as being negative or something that people would do less. I don't know if you can see on the left-hand side there, but people being conservative, that's one of those kind of rows where it's almost blue all the way across. So that's pretty interesting. We can also scroll down just a little bit and get a little bit more into this. So one of the other things that we did is we just plotted the average response to each question and sorted those. And what you'll again notice is that the majority of responses were positive, with the most positive being to public hygiene. So people practicing better public hygiene in the future, people seeking out more evidence-based information, and people being more climate conscious. So when we look at these, when we compare the kind of self and other questions, you'll notice that there are some pretty interesting differences. So we have these kind of correspondingly colored bars. And so for example, people thought that they were going to practice better public hygiene in the future than maybe others. People thought that they would seek out more evidence-based information than others, that they would be more climate conscious than others. And if we scroll down just a little bit more, we can look at this in kind of a scatter plot. So you can see some of those examples here. And this is a really cool tool that one of our team members, Jose, made. It's kind of interactive, so you can, again, click on the specific pairs, and this is just showing a few of them that kind of fell away from the diagonal. So there were cases where people thought they would do something more than others, and then there were cases where people thought they would do something less than others, like for example, pursue relationships online or touch their face or be conservative. Yeah. So this is another one of those fun tools that if anyone's curious, they can go through this later. But yeah, so all in all, people's responses were pretty positive, pretty optimistic about the future. And generally speaking, people thought that they would maybe make significant behavioral changes. So with that, I will pass it off to Rory to wrap it up.
Yes, so the end of our presentation, at the end of our questionnaire, we asked 2 free response questions. So in order to supplement the really great quantitative work that's the majority of the questions on our survey, we let people kind of take it into their own words. These 2 questions, how has the pandemic personally affected you? And what's the first thing you will do once quarantine is fully lifted and things go back to normal, whatever normal looked like? So looking at, we as a group had a really interesting time reviewing all of these answers and stuff. Some were very, very personal and very heartfelt. Some were very specific, like, I will just go back to work as normal, So kind of seeing the variety in those were really useful, but I think the big takeaway for us was ultimately how similar people's responses are. So, even though we're all sort of quarantined or compartmentalized or cooped up in our own separate apartments, houses, wherever in the world we may be, for me, a kind of heartening takeaway around this is just how similar and unified people's experiences, different though they may be, there's a common heart around the sensations of jobs or working from home in the first question. The desire to go visit families and friends, to be experiencing more travel, going back to find food and culture and starting back into those old familiar comforts. So I think together this data set has been a really engaging way to sort of understand and get to the human side of how people are living their lives now.
Awesome. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now. We're still kind of thinking about future directions, but yeah, we will take questions.
Or comments.
One thing I forgot to mention was that how we kind of collected the data was basically just by word of mouth or like getting a convenient sample. We reached out to the channel, the Slack channel, and also just our own individual networks. And that's kind of how we got a bunch of responses that maybe we didn't expect to get.
Thank you, Chakresh.
I have a question about the matrix you brought up. If you could go back, I thought that was a really nice representation. So on the left, hold on, so this is not just, it's a combination of political beliefs as well as like specific actions someone would take?
Yeah, that's a great question. We should have given a little bit more, gone a little bit more into the types of questions we had. So we had questions about kind of future political beliefs or actually personality questions. So whether people thought they were introverted or extroverted, government, vaccines, trust in those kinds of things. Personal hygiene was a big one. But also things like being globally aware, what people think about classroom education, so whether they think they would value it more or less, things like digital commerce, whether they thought people would use it more or less. So we tried to kind of span the gamut in terms of asking questions about all different aspects of life that are no doubt going to be affected by or are already being affected by the virus.
Very nice. Okay, so that's the 10 minutes. So we have our next group presentation. understanding the dynamics of interactions between participants in the Net COVID workshop.
Thank
Hi,
you.
can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll share my screen and just let me know if you can see it. Yep, is it visible?
Yes.
Okay, so hi everyone. We are Team NC Slack Dynamics, and our project is on understanding the dynamics of interactions between participants in the Net COVID workshop. So why we wanted to do this is because we have already seen that during this whole pandemic situation, there's been so much of research and knowledge that has been reproduced and that has been put on the internet. And so many people are working on so many multiple projects. Um, I was curious about this fact that how so much of knowledge is produced and then people react to that to this plethora of ideas, and then they collaborate and come up with more new ideas, and how that process goes on. So our online workshop is one such platform that is kind of a snippet of information of human interactions, which is not the complete scenario, but it still gives us some real-time information about how people interact with each other. So with that motivation, what we did was we extracted the content from all the public channels on the Net COVID workspace, and then based upon how people reacted to the message posts and the threads, we created networks of interaction between all the users. And we also extracted the text contents of all the messages, and we intend to see how we can correlate the responses with emergence of new ideas. So in the Slack API, an interaction can be anything from posting a message or reacting to a message within emoticons, for example, network hearts or wave or anything, and or if you just respond to a message by text. So we actually did this two ways. We used pre-existing it was a PowerShell script on a GitHub repository. I'll share the link at the end of the presentation. And besides, I also tried to make my own Slack app, which actually is based on Pythons, and using Slack API, it can extract all the information. So the first thing that we did was we just looked at the timely activity on the Slack workspace for the past 2 weeks, beginning from day 1, which was the 7th of April. And then we so the bars over here represent the messages, posts, and or reactions to those messages in form of replies. Point to be noted over here is that the reactions, for example, if you react with an emoticon, they do not have any timestamp. So we could not record those, but other than that, this is the timely activity. And if you see that accumulated over days, the most activity happened on the first ending of the first week and beginning of the second week. And in terms of hours, we standardize everything in UTC time zone. So it is mostly towards the evening time. So that is one thing that I'm still trying to understand, that what could be the possible reasons for this thing. And then so this was the first thing that we extracted. And secondly, what I wanted to do was to see how the network looks. So the introduction channel in the Slack workspace was something that everybody responded to and everybody reacted to. So over here, the nodes in the network represent all of the users that joined the introduction channel, and edges represent edges are directed arrows that represent their response to existing messages or anything present in the introduction channel. And this is the degree distribution. This is the in-degree distribution that tells us the average response received by individuals. So the nodes over here are sized with respect to their in-degree, and we can actually make out the differences in the nodes and their properties. So, but over here, we still don't see any distinct community structure emerging, because this seems to be a very closely knit community. So what we did was we moved on to extract information from specific project channels. So as we notice in this slide, that on the third day the activity shot up, and this was the day when all the channels were created where people pitched their project ideas. So in this, what we did was we noticed the reactions of people to project ideas, and we clearly see some distinct communities emerging. So this is what tells me about the nature of interactions, and how now new groups are forming, working on different project ideas. So with this idea in the mind, what we still need to do is that we need to analyze the textual content of all the messages that have been shared on those group project pages channel, and using those we want to map the formation of groups and map the flow of ideas that were exchanged between those groups. Then using that whole using the whole dynamic network, we want to see that if there is any underlying process that drives the backbone of this whole collaboration effect, and then compare this short interval collaboration with the existing literature that says that on an average any collaboration has an aging effect. So do we see the same trend in this form of online platform, and if there is any difference from the physical conferences? So this is still something that we have to do, and we'll be working on this. So and I mean, I'll be very welcome for any suggestions, or if there are any comments that you could give me. So many thanks to the Net COVID organizers and also my team members. And I extensively use the Slack API, and this is the GitHub repository that is really brilliant to extract the Slack content. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, there's an interesting question in the chat. When you're looking at the responses, are you able to access the responders or in general Slack users metadata?
Yeah. So this GitHub repository, in that you can actually extract that. But for my purpose, I did not do that because I wanted to keep the user information secret. So instead, what you do get is the user ID. So, but depending on your app's properties, you can actually do extract the user information as well.
Can you get the DM metadata so you can look at the networks of who direct messages each other?
Yeah, so for the DM, I haven't actually explored that yet, but that actually depends on the properties of the Slack app. So, for example, if I install the Slack app, and if the community that is exchanging messages lets me into that channel or into that conversation, only then can I extract the content.
Okay, it would be interesting because we were organizing via DM initially. So you might see some interesting clusters that way, or like how people dropped out of networks as the groups coalesced.
Yeah, I am interested in that, but for this, so I really didn't want to explore too much, in the sense because I didn't want to I did not want to get access to personal comments or personal messages. So I'll in future I'll try to post a form which says that if permission is granted, then only I'll try to access that content. So yeah, so we can definitely do that.
All right, thank you.
I think we have time for about one more question here.
I have a quick question, if I may. I know a number of Slack workspaces can do analytics that Slack itself generates, that any members can view just online through their browser. Does our Slack group do that? I mean, what are the kind of limitations, privacy things around that?
So I do know one of the Slack apps that actually does this form of analysis for you, but I don't know that. I think that is the Compass app, and they charge for their services. But with the Slack API, you can actually anybody can do that. So they can for the channels that they are member of, they can extract all the information and then do the analytics. And I'm not very much aware of the other interfaces that do that.
Okay. Everyone, thank you very much. This was a great session. I want to remind everyone that we have an open discussion session starting at 2. Michelle is organizing that, so you can find that link in the logistics channel. If you have any input on this session, please go to the link shared on the screen here, go.umd.edu/netcovid_3b. And we still have, no, the other group got replaced into the 6th parallel session. So if you're interested in going to see the final group, there you can go to parallel session 6. So once again, thank you, everyone. I'm going to keep this open for a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or one of the other co-organizers. Thank you.